Hey folks, today we're going to be taking a look at the 1.16 changelog. This is for the Khans of the Steppe DLC. This is coming out next Monday, and we're going to get our hands on all that new Mongol and Nomad content when that does come out. So we're going to go through the patch notes here. I'm not going to go through absolutely everything. A lot of the things here have been covered in the recent dev diaries, but there are definitely some things we want to call out, some unannounced changes that are very interesting as well. So the first thing they're going to cover, as always here, is the paid expansion features. This is basically everything around nomadic governments themselves, the Eurasian Steppe update, the new play style of being nomads, herd migration, all those kind of mechanics around that system. That is all going to be in the actual paid DLC itself, so you do need to pick that up. It is part of the Chapter 4 content if you haven't got that already. So they're going to talk about migration, herd, nomadic vassal contracts, all those kind of things. The one thing I am going to call out here, though, is that nomads have a new dread cap of 150. I'm not sure if this was covered before. I don't remember it. But nomads are going to have that higher dread cap, so that's going to help you keep people on your side, deal with those new belligerent vassals, those tributes, and obviously people that are generally just trying to get rid of you in the steppe. They have got that higher cap there. And then, as I was saying, a whole bunch of things here. The Kurultai replacing the council, that was covered in last week's dev diary, and that looks really cool. You can kind of specialize your council doing multiple of the same tasks and all that kind of stuff, which is really fun to see. The one thing I'm going to call out next, though, is the 2 new bookmarks. So in 1178, we're getting the Endless Sky bookmark, and in 1066, we are getting At the Gates bookmark as well. Now, that doesn't mean 867 you can't play as a nomad. There just isn't a setup bookmark with highlighted characters that you can choose. I think these are mainly just for like new players, people just picking up the DLC, don't really know what's going on. You can pick one of the selected characters. I mean, one of them is the Khan himself, and then a bunch of other characters that make interesting campaigns. So potentially you will play as one of those next week. They've also added a new game rule. They talked about this previously. This is for the Sepmi, the Karelia, Arabia, the Sahel, and the Horn of Africa. You can make those nomadic governments. They aren't on by default. This is very much like admin government worked for the Byzantines, where only the Byzantines had it by default. But in the game rules, you could turn it on for other realms in the world, and you can do that already with this. I'm sure there'll be some mods. If you want to turn it on for everyone or something crazy like that, I'm sure there'll be a mod on release day that lets you do that. The other thing they've called out here is change the map table to be adjusted based on situation. E.g., the Byzantine map is only for the Byzantines, and the plague one will only happen when there are significant plagues. Previously, you chose a map and it always stayed as that one. I think you could change it and it always stayed as that one. Now it is kind of dynamic, I guess, depending on where you're playing in the world. This, I think, will have some game rules around it where you can just permanently have it as the Byzantines, even if you're not playing in the Byzantine realm. I'm sure you're going to be able to still do that in the game rules. And then, as I said, a whole bunch of other things here, cultural traditions, men-at-arms, but as I've said, we've covered that previously. They have added a new blood brother relationship type, which is similar to the friend relation. This is only available through the Swear Blood Brotherhood interaction, and there is an achievement based on this as well. If you do this once, you get an achievement, which is pretty cool. And this provides positive modifiers for useful blood brothers and alliances between ruler blood brothers. So basically a new way in this nomadic DLC to get some, I'm not going to say like free alliances, but alliances that you couldn't get previously potentially through these blood brothers that you have. So again, we'll see how that plays out once we get our hands on it. The next one is pretty cool. Added severed head content to the execution interaction, allowing you to keep the heads of those you have beheaded, or if you don't want to do that, you can actually send the head to their successors. So if you behead the ruler of the HRE, whoever takes over, you could send the head to him and say, like, the Byzantines send their regards or something like that. Here's the head of your father, potentially, and what are you going to do about it, I guess? I mean, in some situations, they're probably going to be happy about it, because then they're the king and he isn't. But anyway, I thought this was a cool little addition here. I'm sure there's going to be some funny playthroughs. The next thing I wanted to highlight was the new Nomadic Dynasty Legacy, which is focusing on herd management, fertility, raiding, and military might. We've seen all these. Every time we've had a DLC, there's been a legacy kind of linked into it. What are we up to now? Like 12, 13 legacies? I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's a bunch of them all around the map. We have the Special Iberia ones, other ones around the world that have come in with DLC, and the Nomads not missing out. A bunch of things focused on that area. I imagine if you're playing in a nomadic realm, you're probably going to choose this. It depends what you're doing in your campaigns, but very likely you're going to pick up this new Dynasty Legacy. I guess if you think you're going to escape it quickly, there's no point, but we'll see what bonuses they give and all that good stuff. Next, I'm going to move on to game content. They've added 5 new raid intents available for nomadic and tribal armies, We have talked about this previously, but I wanted to highlight it again because this is for nomads and tribal realms. So this is pillage, terrorize, capture, plunder, and adventure. These allow you to kind of specialize how your raids are going to work. If you want to steal more gold, if you want to capture more people, if you want to plunder the realm, or if you just want to terrorize and cause a bunch of shenanigans, you can now focus on those things. It'd be interesting to see how this changes like the northern realms. Are they going to get a buff from this? Because these are better versions of raiding. So potentially we might see those realms doing even better than they currently do, which would be pretty cool to see, to be honest. The next one I'm going to call out is added potential friends, potential lovers, tributaries, and suzerains to the default activity guest invite rules. This really just meaning people you might have wanted to have invited before. You had to kind of manually go in and do it. But by default now, it's pretty much always just going to invite everyone you could possibly want to go there. Obviously, you can uninvite them, things like that, but that has changed like the base version of how that works. The next one is added character interaction for Guardians to teach a commander trait to a ward. This is a great change, especially with how commander traits work since the last update, in the Crown update, where they became XP scalable traits. It's really cool now you can actually teach these to a ward. So if you're playing, especially as nomads, I would think, where you're very warlike, you're always going to war, you're always getting these traits where possible, you can now pass them on to your children or a ward of somebody else's, and then they will start with those traits and then potentially rank them up. So really just getting those a little bit earlier and maybe being able to like specialize your wards a little bit depending on what commander traits you have yourself. But I guess not necessarily yourself, it is for Guardians. So if you have a son, you could send him to somebody that has one of those traits that you want, and then potentially he will pick that up. Again, outside of that, just really calling out some minor changes here. There is the new vassal stance belligerent. We have seen that in the dev diaries, mainly focused around nomads and keeping your tributaries under your control and things like that. So that is a change though. Next is going to be the database. They've renamed the Kingdom of Mongolia to the Kingdom of Atuken. They've rearranged the starting cultural traditions for cultures in the steppe. They talked about this last week in the dev diary, made a few new cultural traditions, reworked some of the older ones. Going to make it a little bit more interesting there as well. And then the last one here, they've changed one of the special cathedrals. They've made it 3 upgradable levels and changed kind of how it's named and all those kind of things. And they've also made some other minor changes there to some of the special buildings. I think that was one of the ones added with the buildings DLC. Do let me know if I'm wrong there, but I think it was done. The next is some bug fixes. Again, a whole list of these. Most of them minor changes, but they're going to start with a very interesting one. The AI will now actually check if they can feudalize holdings now. They've never done so. This is kind of wild that 1, this never worked, and 2, they kind of like flippantly have it in here. I don't know. This is kind of crazy to me that this didn't work. I've never noticed this. I've never heard it talked about, but I guess people were reporting it. The game's been out, what, like 4 or 5 years now? And the AI would never feudalize tribal holdings? Let me know what you think about that. That is crazy that it's got this far into the game without it working that way. But we'll see what this brings to the game. This is obviously going to help AI realms, because if they took over tribal lands, they will now actually feudalize it, put castles there, and then start building the castle upgrades, things like that. So absolutely crazy this wasn't working before, and that it's never been fixed until now. We'll see what it brings in our future campaigns. Next, I wanted to call out players will only be informed of faith creation when nearby or otherwise relevant to them. Not a crazy change here, but it was kind of annoying. You get these pop-ups of like, Bob from Scotland has created this new faith or something. Cool, I'm playing in India, why do I care? So that has been scaled down a little bit, which is pretty nice. The next one is fix peasant faction war not being inherited on death of the primary defender. A nice change here. I mean, we all deal with peasant wars relatively easily, but it is good to see this fix, so they will continue. They're not just going to end when the primary defender dies. When I've been playing some campaigns, this has happened, and it's kind of caught me off guard and like, what's going on here? But I guess it was a bug, and that has now been fixed, which is great to see. Next, we're going to talk about balance. Disillusioned factions will now also destroy any kingdoms an emperor might hold, avoiding border gore and also impotent disillusioned faction outcomes where everyone is still in one realm. This is mainly, as it's kind of alluding to, if you were an emperor and you actually only held like one kingdom, and that was most of your land, if they dissolved the emperor title, well, you were just the king and everyone just stayed within your realm, so it didn't really matter. I think this is relatively rare for this to happen in those situations, but it is a good fix. It was kind of crazy work that way, and we are going to see that working that little bit better, a little bit more sensible here. The next one, we'll see how much this affects things in game. Increased and standardized the speed of adventurer contracts. I wonder if this is taking aim at the stewardship ones. There's what, Settle Border Dispute, which is literally like one button press and you just finish it and you get like 120 gold. And then there can be like building a building, which takes like 2 years, and then you get less gold or more gold. But like the time difference between them is crazy. It looks like we are going to get that standardized. I wonder if they're going to just standardize the time, but not the cost. I'm not too sure. We'll see when this is in game, but it looks like we are getting some kind of balance around the speed compared to like the reward, I guess, that you do get. And then the last one I wanted to call out in this section was flat men-at-arms bonuses from cultural traditions have been converted to percentage bonuses. We've seen this across a few other things. I think it was mentioned in one of the nomadic dev diaries that they were changing some of these. But this is going to be cultural traditions now having percentage bonuses, not flat bonuses. So before, if it was like plus 20 to archers, it's now going to be, I guess, like plus 10% to archers. Really, so you can't stack these on top of your units. I guess it's to kind of make it so you can't have relatively terrible units get really good because you could just stack flat bonuses. Whereas if it's like 10%, 10%, 10%, that is like a progressively worse bonus rather than if it was like plus 10, plus 10, plus 10. That would actually add up to more of a bonus in most circumstances. So I think this is really just to stop you stacking them and getting really high numbers. Again, we'll see once we get our hands on it. Next is going to be all the art. We're not going to cover any of this because there was a whole dev diary around this, but it's really just new event art, art for the new units, art for succession types, art for new court positions with all the new nomadic ones, new Casaspelli icons. So as we all know, the Crusader Kings always knock it out of the park with their illustrations of their art, and we're getting a whole bunch. As you can see, I'm still scrolling through all this. This is all the new art, all the new clothing, weapons, hats, all those things that we're going to get, new character animations. They had talked about previously, I will mention this here, they're actually redoing how the kind of character wireframes, is it called, where they can have more movement in them. That is coming in this patch. So if you have mods that are based on character, like clothing and things like that, there is a chance that will be a little bit slower to update this time. I would think they've given the biggest ones, like the Community Flavor Pack, access to this early so they can get it ready for the launch, or at least pretty soon afterwards. But if you're playing a smaller mod that has like cultural clothing and things, you might see a bit of a delay in that getting updated as they have to update everything to work under this new system. But we can see there's a bunch of new things you can do here: surveying whilst mounted, conversing whilst mounted, shepherding with sheep, standing next to a horse, galloping with a sword and shield. These new things that they talked about previously would allow them to have these new animations by having this new updated character model. So we will see that now and in the future as well. Next is all the user modding. We're not going to look at this. As I always say, I play fantastic mods. I have no idea how people make them. I would think there's a bunch of things in here that a certain Game of Thrones mod will be very happy to have and very happy to look at how this could be implemented into their mods. The next thing is the interface. Rework the Realm Window interface. Being one of the oldest panels, they're basically saying that this was kind of hard to work with. It hadn't had any love since the game came out. So they've actually rewritten this whole UI, and they're going to have a much better version, one where they can kind of make additions in the future. It won't be as hard for them to do so. And again, I would imagine mods are going to make use of this as well. But they don't show an example here. I guess we'll see in game. I don't know if it's going to look that different. It's just going to be a lot easier for them to do things with that UI, which will be cool to see in the future. They've added an expanded interface for the Kurultai tasks. They did cover this last week about how they work with you being able to select one of 8 tasks rather than it being, you know, martial, stewardship, etc. You can now have like 4 people doing a martial task. Again, look at last week's, it was really cool. They've also made the paper style UI skinnable. Again, they showed this last week. This is from contracts or letters. They can now have special cultural versions. For now, most of the world is getting the standard one we've already had, but Mongolic cultures are now going to have a more Eastern style paper interface. I'm sure with the China DLC, we'll see some different ones as well. It'd be cool for them to go back and do some of the older ones. Maybe if we get content next year around Europe or Africa, we'll see some cool ones as well. The other thing I wanted to call out here is they've added contextual map icons for when raiders are raised and selected. This will show alliance loot within a range of the selected raider armies owned by the player. So I guess what this means is you no longer will have to like hover over each kind of county to see how much money it would make. It sounds like maybe once you have the army selected, it will now show on the map like how much gold each county is worth. So again, you don't have to keep going in and checking each one separately. This one I'm very interested in seeing because this could make raiding that little bit easier. Just a little bit more information at your fingertips. You're not having to go into all these different areas. You could just see if I'm selecting a raider army, you could just see, okay, I want to raid all these areas at a glance, making it that little bit easier to do. And then the last thing I'm going to call out here is multiplayer. I don't play multiplayer myself, but it looks like there's been a great change here. Improved default transfer speed for multiplayer save games, which will reduce the start of multiplayer games significantly. This is where, you know, if you're all together playing, it's speeded up like syncing all the saves to all the players, and then you'd be able to actually play the multiplayer game. It looks like they've made some significant improvements to this. They say it's 4 times faster than it was previously, which is great to hear. But with that, that is the end of the patch notes. As I've said, I've not gone through absolutely everything here. We would be here for like an hour or two if I did everything, and a lot of them are relatively minor, and the major changes have been covered in recent Dev Diary videos. So if you haven't watched those already, they're on the channel, covering all the major Dev Diaries, all the features coming, how they work, how they interact with the rest of the game, all those kind of things. So do go back and watch those if you are interested. The update is out next Monday, so you've got time to watch those and then get ready for all the cool stuff coming next week. So if you've enjoyed the video today, do make sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here. I play Crusader Kings, I cover all the Dev Diaries, I do news, discussion videos, and I also cover Project Caesar, aka EU5, on the channel in a very similar manner if you're looking forward to that game as well. But we'll leave it there for today. They do say the next Dev Diary is not going to be for a couple of weeks because they want to focus on the release and aftermath of Khans of the Steppe, and they also want to take some feedback and then tell us about that. So I would imagine in like 3 to 4 weeks, we'll probably get a major feedback Dev Diary, what they're going to do to make any changes if needed. I'm sure there will be some with the kind of major changes this does bring. And then after that, they'll be working towards the China DLC. And they have already mentioned when that was announced that we are getting China-focused Dev Diaries very early. I think they said maybe the end of May. Maybe it was June. They said very early compared to before because there's so much content to show and they want to get a lot of feedback from us. So a lot of things to look forward to for Crusader Kings players. A lot of cool things for us to be doing this year. But we'll leave it there for today, and I'll see you all in the next one.